Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Continuous Self-Assessment Podcast. Today, we're looking at the Staff and Volunteers Standard, and we will be talking through the indicators and what we would like to see from you during this self-assessment process. My name is Yvonne, I'm the Learning and Engagement Officer, and with me, as always, I've got Steve Griffiths, and we're joined today by Sally Munday.
Hello everyone, I'm Steve Griffiths and I'm work for the quality team.
And I'm Sally Munday and I'm Head of Volunteering.
Okay, so as Yvonne said, we're going to look at the standard area called Staff and Volunteers. And this just has one must indicator in it, which is the first one. And the other indicators are all good practice. So as usual, we will go through each indicator one by one, and I'll ask Sally to draw out the key points, particularly the things we'll be looking for in your narrative in the self-assessment. Also, just to remind you that a lot of the elements covered in this standard are also covered in protecting families. So please use your safeguarding checklist and your general file audits when you're writing your self-assessment, looking at the elements around supervision and training. So we're going to start off looking at the first indicator, which is 001, and this is the only must indicator in this standard area, and it's looking at how volunteers are trained, supported and supervised. Over to Sally to ask you what you would like to pull out about this indicator.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It's obviously quite a big one. It covers the whole way in which we manage volunteers in terms of them being trained, supported and supervised. So there's a lot that you could pick out in your narrative when you're talking via your submission. So I thought I would also draw everyone's attention to a page in our handbook that talks about what we expect our volunteering experience to feel like for volunteers. So if you've got your handbook in front of you, it's page 63. We say that across our federation, our aim is to provide a volunteering experience that is flexible, diverse and inclusive, digitally enabled, participation focused and well supported. So I just thought I'd talk around a few of those a little bit more. We all know that in our whole sector, and it isn't unique to Home Start, that volunteering can be a little bit of a challenge at the moment in terms of retaining, recruiting, onboarding, keeping our numbers high enough, especially when we've got so many families that need us. So when it comes to being flexible, we would love to hear in your narrative about how you have been flexible or innovative in the way in which you're supporting, training or supervising your volunteers. We would love to hear about new roles you're offering. Perhaps you've tried evening courses or you've tried online versions of training. All those things would be so useful for us to hear because it helps build a picture of the way in which that we're supporting volunteers as a federation. Of course, with everything, EEDI underpins all of our work. And so again, in your narrative, if possible, and not just under this point, but all of your points throughout this quality standard, if you could talk about the way in which perhaps your work with volunteers is aiming to reach more families or become a little bit more representative of your families that you support in your community, it would be really brilliant to hear about that. When we say digitally enabled, we're talking about how it sort of links back to flexibility, really, how volunteers and staff and trustees might want to be able to be using more online tools that meet their needs, while also being committed to developing in-person approaches to training and supervision. We know that sometimes a bit of both is actually what people need. When we say participation focused, that's about how we involve our community, volunteers, staff and trustees and our families and children to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our volunteers when it comes to motivation, the ways in which they feel they can get involved. So if you can talk about that when you're talking about volunteers, training, supervision and support, that would be brilliant. The final one is about being well supported, which I think is sort of 001 in a nutshell. So we've talked about having experienced staff, and that's where we come into play as well at Home Start UK, hopefully providing enough support and resource from the volunteering team. So there's all of those 5 points that hopefully can help you give greater depth to not only this quality standard but the rest of the ones that we're asking for in this HSQA.
Thank you, Sally. So all the remaining indicators are should indicators or best practice ones. So 002 is very straightforward, and it's about that you should nominate a lead staff member with oversight of volunteer practice development. And Sally, anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I suppose it's just remembering that, we always hold on to the fact that across our network, our home starts vary in size and capacity and resource so greatly. So please don't worry if you don't have a named lead trustee or a named lead staff member. It's just about making sure that somebody knows that it's within their remit, either as a volunteer coordinator, volunteer manager, or maybe it's a coordinator or your local home start manager. They know that within their role is to deliver oversight of volunteer practice development. So yeah, just making sure that you've got that covered, and I'm sure you have, but please don't worry if you don't have a named, it's not somebody's job title. I suppose that would be my main thing to pick out from that one.
Thank you. Moving on to the next indicator, which is HSQA7. Now, this covers trustees, staff and volunteers and is around their skills, knowledge and abilities. Sally, what would you like to say about that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of covered in 001 when we're talking about volunteers, but this obviously is widened out and includes staff and trustees as well. There's loads of different ways you can evidence this in either evidence or your narrative. So making sure you're thinking about what sort of things you offer for all your people. So whether it's a training plan, perhaps you've done a trustee skills audit and that's really supported your work going forward. We would love to know about all of those different bits and bobs that you might have put in place to support your people at your home start.
Thank you. Moving on to the next one, which is HSQA8. So this now back is to volunteers only, and it's about them attending the initial course of preparation. It's very straightforward indicator, but over to you, Sally, if there's anything you want to say about that one.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously we need to know that every home visitor volunteer has attended a course of preparation. We know that some home starts give it a different name, but as long as it's the main content that is delivered from Home Start UK that's covered, then that's really important. And of course it says as well in the indicator that it's as a minimum. So actually this is also your chance to tell us about all the other learning and volunteer journeys of learning that your volunteers go on when they're being onboarded, and it might not just be in those home visitor roles. We know that a lot of home starts who have group volunteers also undertake a prep course or a version of the prep course. So training records and attendance would be really useful in that section. But from a volunteering point of view, we would love to hear what other things you've been putting in place to support your training journey.
Thank you. So moving on to HSQA9. So this indicator is about staff and volunteers, and it's really around safety. So Sally, what would you like to say about this?
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. So with this one, I think it's really important because it's all about safety. So you'll have things like your safeguarding checklist, any informal chats with your staff and volunteers, reviews of your systems when things have changed. We would love to hear about dynamic risk assessments, things that you're doing to make sure that people feel safe even when things change, especially around things like home visitor volunteers who are out and about with families. So there's all sorts of different, and there's other processes as well, of course, like lone working and things like that. We'd love to hear about in your narrative.
Thank you. And HSQA 10 really follows on from the previous indicator, and it's really covering the same areas, but asking you to say how you actually ensure that your staff and volunteers know about those policies and are able to work to them safely in practice.
Yeah, exactly. So it definitely is a follow-on from the one before. We still like to hear about your safeguarding checklist, dynamic risk assessments, but also how you're communicating them? Do you have a regular newsletter? Do you use a specific way of informing people? Is it done differently depending on whether it's staff, trustees and volunteers? These are the sort of things that we would love to hear about in your narrative as part of your submission this time, because it really helps to paint a real picture of the way in which you're keeping your staff, trustees and volunteers safe and communicated well, and also that they feel they're able to communicate back with you.
And the final indicator, HSQA 11, is again relating to staff and volunteers, but this time it's focusing down really on the frequency and the quality of your supervision, and that it covers safeguarding and child protection.
Yes, so this is a brilliant one. Obviously, it is covered in 001 when we're talking about supervision, but really what we'd like to see and hear evidence of here is supervision, your full supervision, and any interim supervision that takes place as well. We know that the volunteer policy now says every 6 weeks for volunteer supervision, so making sure that that's covered. That's just volunteers, of course, but staff as well, specifically around every level of staff member, trustee and volunteer in your organisation. We want to make sure that everything that we can see, that everything you're doing, and I'm sure it's all brilliant, and we want to make sure that we're capturing that in your narrative on your form.
Thank you. So just following on from what Sally said, we're only asking you for 2 pieces of evidence in relation to this self-assessment. The first one is for you to upload the blank supervision template that you use to record supervisions on. We don't want you to provide us with a completed form because we don't want you to share any personal information. And the second piece of evidence is the frequency of the supervision that your senior manager has. The reason we're asking for this is because sometimes when we go out to do reviews, we find supervisions in place for volunteers and members of staff, but sometimes it's the senior manager's supervision that perhaps is not so frequent as it should be. And we really want to focus on that and make sure that the senior manager is getting frequent supervision in line with your supervision policy. So this is a fairly straightforward standard for you to self-assess against. And as I said at the beginning, you will have covered a lot of this in the Protecting Families standard through your safeguarding checklist and your general file audits. Anyway, we really look forwards to receiving your self-assessments and evidence. And I'll just hand back over to Yvonne to just tell you when the deadlines are.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so there are 7 indicators in this standard. 1 is a must, 1 is a should, and then there's 5 best practices. The evidence that we're asking you to upload this time is a blank supervision template, and then you can either list in the narrative box or upload in a separate document with all the dates of the last 12 months worth of managers' supervision. This standard will be open from the 1st of November 2025, and we expect submissions to be completed by the 31st of January 2026, which seems really bizarre to be thinking about 2026 already. This year seems to have just flown by. If you do get stuck, or you need help logging in, or you just need a little bit of extra support, do reach out to the quality team. They're always really happy to help, and you can pop an email over to quality@home-start.org.uk, and someone will pick up that message for you. Thanks to Steve and Sally for recording today's podcast. Best of luck with your submissions, and we shall see you all in the next one. Ta-da!